Hello, everyone. How are you guys doing today? We are going to start with today's class. The idea is to give a quick introduction to web development using Flask and, of course, Python. We want to walk you through the process of especially getting started. I have just seen a question from Danielle, and it's kind of an advanced question. It's regarding APIs and Flask. And Daniela will just share a link with you in a few seconds about a simple API we have built. So maybe you can take a look at that. It's code that it's already built. But today, the idea is just for you guys to have a quick understanding of how things work in regards of web development and how to get started, especially with Python and Flask. To be honest, it's really simple to get started with web development using Python and Flask because Python is a simple language to understand and to read. And Flask is a simple framework to get started. It will be just something as writing a function and having something actually running, which is pretty cool. Of course, if you guys want to start doing more advanced things, it's going to take more time, but obviously that there is no magic behind these. But just getting started, it's simple and it's something that you guys can do. So we have a couple of guests here, Eric, Kyle, Keith. The idea for you guys is to be able to join and to ask any question you guys have. You can always just unmute yourselves and you can just ask the question you have. That's the idea of today's class. This is the same thing that we usually do with our classes at rmotr. We try to have a small group of people because, of course, it's a good environment to answer questions and, of course, share feedback. So if you have any questions, just unmute your microphone, go ahead and speak. And today, let me start with, this is the same thing that we do with our rmotr classes, so it's pretty standard. The first thing we're going to do is I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get started. For those of you watching the webinar, if you guys have any questions, just post it and we will walk through them and we will be answering them live. All right, so don't be afraid, just ask your questions. So I'm going to start screen sharing. So we start with our first concepts today. There you go. And we are going to start with a few important concepts related to web development. And also we will try to answer any questions in regards, for example, of HTTP and the architecture. I encourage you guys to check our courses, which are, of course, they're longer versions of this class. They last for 1 month. They're highly practical. We encourage you guys to do as much practice as possible. We have a free course published to do web development with Flask also that has some practice. Flask, you guys can access it. It's live and it's open. It's free. It's in our own platform. That it's an entire course, video course containing also practice for you guys to do. So the first thing, I'm going to share this resource with you. You guys will have access to it in the chat, and I'm also going to share our first set of slides so you can see them while we're working. So we're going to start with web development. Working with the web is something that started, as you guys know, a long time ago. And we have made a lot of progress in the process. But the truth is that the main progress has been done in regards mostly in the front-end technologies. The back end, the way servers process requests from clients and return responses, basically the work that is going to be done by a server is still pretty standard and hasn't changed that much. We are still using, we're going to talk about it, a protocol that it's called HTTP, and it's been around for a really long time. So this is a good thing, to be honest, because what you guys will learn here, it's something that it's standard and it will keep being a standard for a really long time. You guys, if you focus on the back end, you will not see all the craziness you can see from, for example, in the front end. So that's a good thing. Now, to do web development, you guys could just do bare networkings. I don't know if anybody has experience doing networking, but just doing all from scratch, right? Or you could choose to, for example, use a web framework. Of course, using a web framework is the standard and the preferred option for all of us. And the idea of a web framework is to have a library that will help you with the basics, with the most common tasks, the redundant tasks that we need to do for every web project. So for example, a simple task like answering or responding to basic requests, get requests to our site. We're going to talk about get, post, HTTP and all that later. But basically, when someone browses your site, being able to respond to that request. Or for example, some of frameworks will include authentication including, for example, cookies. Some other frameworks might include managing sessions and etc. There will be different tasks that a web framework will take care for us, right? So it's going to ease our lives in that regard, so we don't have to build things that are already built by someone else. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. That's basically the idea. Now, in terms of Python is a great language to work with web development because it's a simple language to write, or not simple, it's a language that reads good, right? So in terms of developer productivity, it's a great programming language. We can get a lot done in a short amount of time. It's a great programming language. Just, of course, this is an opinion. If I say this is a great programming language, I don't have much to say aside from that's my opinion. And I guess you guys, if you read around, you will see a lot of people agreeing with me. And also, it's a language that has, and this is aside from the language, right? Python could be a great language, but if we don't have, for example, libraries, it's a useless language because we can't start writing everything by ourselves. Python, of course, that's not the case, and Python has a lot of libraries included, right? So we can, I don't know, do you need to do some cryptography? You can just get a cryptography library with Python. Do you need to process JSON? You can just get a JSON library. You know, so there are a lot of things already built from simple things or more like natural things like processing JSON to, I don't know, something like accessing the Twitter API or the Reddit API. There are already libraries built that will ease our process, and all those advantages of having things already built also apply for web development, right? So for example, sending emails is something that's going to be super simple if we're using a Python-powered website. Also, there is a lot written in regards of Python and, of course, the frameworks. Python is a language that has been around for a really long time, and there is, I don't know, you guys can find a lot of documentation, books, blog posts, good practices, opinions from other developers. There is one big Python conference happening every year in Europe, in America, in different places. So it's a great programming language in general. And of course, again, that it's something that we inherit by using the web frameworks, either Flask or Django that we're going to talk. So in regards of web frameworks directly, we focus on the two most common web frameworks, Flask and Django. There are others which are also good. So I can name Bottle, I can name Cherry Pie, I can name Pyramid, but maybe the two most common one, the most known frameworks are Django and Flask. And we actually use Flask for our own classes. And we are usually asked about why we choose Flask and why we don't use Django. And the truth is that we love Django. It's one of our preferred web frameworks. We actually use Django for every other system, internal system, public system that we have to use. Actually, this is the Learn platform that we use for our own students to work with. And this is entirely built with Django. And we love Django. But the truth is that for people getting started with web development, sometimes it's maybe, I don't know if it's too big of a framework, right? It's like, first of all, it will have a lot of things already done for you. And that's a good thing, of course, if you're trying to develop something new. If you're an experienced developer, you don't want to get, or you don't want to start working on things that are repetitive. You want everything already done, and that's great. But if you're starting, if you're learning, it's good to do something just one time, just like, let's handle authentication by hand. Don't use any library. Let's do everything from scratch. Let's reinvent the wheel, because the best way to learn about wheels is by reinventing wheels, right? You guys are learning. You want to understand how things work. So Flask is a framework that doesn't have a lot of things already done and already built. So it will force you to build them. And there are libraries. Flask is a great framework. Doesn't mean that if we use Flask professionally, we have to build everything by ourselves. There are libraries that we can use, and we can achieve the same end result as if we would be using Django. But the truth is that if you just get Flask by itself without any external library, you pretty much get a bare bones, simple, minimalistic framework. So you have to do a lot of things by yourself, and you will end up learning and knowing how those things work in the real life. Also, it's a framework that it's not hiding too many things. It's not abstracting the developer so much. Dylan, do you have a question? Because we have a raising hand. Oh, all right, no worries. And so that's basically the idea of why we use Flask. I don't want to waste a lot of time here. We love both Flask and Django. They are both great frameworks. Depending on the use case, you guys will choose one or the other. Flask is a great framework to build, for example, microservices, to build APIs. Django is a great framework for pretty much everything. It's a really large framework. It has too many things, so it's important to understand what are you guys using with it, right? Because if you guys have let's put a simple analogy right here. If you live in a really small home, all the windows and all the doors you have to watch, right? It's like, I know this place, this is a really small home, but I know every single square foot out of it. But if you guys live in a gigantic castle, there are so many windows and doors, and you have to take care of all of that, So the same thing happens with Django. It's too large, and you guys, if you don't know everything, or at least you don't have a good sense of that, you will have performance issues. You might have security issues. So that's why we usually go with Flask. So if you guys have any questions, just let me know. I'm just going to move forward here and drop the topic of Flask versus Django. We love both. We're going to get you introduced to web development using Flask. So let's talk for a second about the client-server architecture. Today, thinking about, not even today, when I was learning programming and people were talking about client-server architecture, it seemed like, a super simple thing, like, dude, that thing is obvious, right? We know about the client-server architecture, but when web development started, that wasn't the standard. I don't know if we have someone that had the chance to work with systems back in the 80s or 70s, but that wasn't a standard, right? Client-server wasn't a standard at all. Networking worked differently, and as you guys know, the internet started a really long time ago. So that's why client-server is still such a big thing to talk about, but still for us, it seems like the obvious thing to do. But let's walk through it really quickly. The idea of client-server is that we will have several actors, and we will have to identify which actor is taking place or it's acting at each particular phase our for development or life cycle of our application, right? So this is what I'm going to show you here is the usual process that we follow in any regular web applications. Usually we have 3 actors, and here we can have more. Again, it's the 95% use case pretty much everyone faces when building web applications. We usually have a client, right? We have someone accessing google.com, right? Accessing our website through a browser in a simple computer. We have our server, that's the thing that we're going to build, and we will usually go to the database either to save or store information or to retrieve information, to read information from the database. So usually we will have this concept of requests and responses, right? So the client will, of course, start a communication. The client will be the one trying to access our website, and it will start the process with an HTTP request. We're going to talk about HTTP in a second. The server will then answer receive that request first. It will receive the request and it will have some information. So for example, what are you trying to access? Are you trying to access google.com, or are you trying to access mail@google.com, or are you trying to access, I don't know, different type of URLs, different type of paths? Where is this request coming from, right? Is it coming from, I don't know, America or Canada or Mexico or whatever? So it has some information with that request. With that information, oh, sorry, one more thing. For example, is the request sending any files? So for example, you guys have a form that you can upload your profile picture. That picture will be submitted, right, sent with the request. So the server has all that information, all the information regarding the request itself, plus files and information uploaded. The server then will need to do some processing with that information, right? It will have to check, I don't know, if the user is authenticated or not, if the user has privileges or not, if the operation is valid, all things that we're getting closer here to business logic, right? Things that are special to this particular website. So the internal processing is going to start. Usually the server will start a back and forth process with the database, right? For example, this user says that it's, I don't know, this username and this password. Do we have someone with this username and password stored in the database? Of course, if the answer is true, we're going to get a successful request. If it's not true, we're going to fail the request because the user is not authenticated, etc. We're going to have some communication, some type of communication with the database. The database will send the results, and finally, the server will send a response. What type of response? Depends. We can have a successful response. So for example, one second, there you go, I'm sorry. For example, if the user had the correct privileges and if the information was correct, then we have a successful response. If the user, for example, submitted a profile picture that was above, I don't know, 5 megabytes, we will fail a request, for example. Or if the email address was already present in our database and the user was trying to register using the same email address, we're going to fail a request. So we will have, of course, successful and failure cases. And we are the ones as developers working on our server application to actually respond with success or error. We're going to see different type of responses we have. So basically here, going back to the actors, we'll see this client-server dance, right? Clients communicating with servers, and we of course see that with the web browser, with the original client and our server. But when we are, for example, communicating with the database, we're also doing a client-server communication, and we clients, because we are going to the database and asking information to that database, and the database is answering us. So that's important. Finally, and this has become like more prominent in the last 5-10 years, it's But clients are not just web browsers. We might have building a web application. We might have different types of clients. For example, a mobile application. Not every, but pretty much every application out there, when it has to communicate with the server. So for example, you have your Twitter application in your phone and you are loading the tweets. The application is communicating with the Twitter server to get those tweets. The communication there will be established in a similar way as a web application with, for example, a REST API that basically works on top of HTTP, and you guys will write the same code as you write for a traditional client web, like HTML-based application. You will just process the request, go to the database, and respond something. Of course, the response we're going to include is going to be different for the server that it's answering the Twitter client, the mobile application. But again, you're doing everything as a web development interface. Especially, you will work on top of HTTP. So I'm going to go now to HTTP. I don't think if I had, let me share these slides with you. There you go. Remember, if you guys have any questions, just please let me know. And we're going to start talking really quickly about HTTP. So someone has a question? A few things. First of all, HTTP is really important. If you guys want to get serious about web development, HTTP is key. It's something you guys have to know from top to bottom. The difference between a really good web developer and a not so good web developer is usually HTTP. When things get hairy, when things are complicated in terms, you have to be extra careful with performance, and you have to be extra careful with security. In those cases, understanding HTTP is seriously really important. So the first thing that I'm telling you is that it's really important. The second thing, of course, if I'm giving such importance to HTTP, it's something also that you guys can't just learn in 15 minutes. So I'm going to give you guys a quick introduction to HTTP. And actually, that's why I have this slide here. So it's super important. I'm going to give you a quick introduction to HTTP, the bare minimum for you guys to understand how it works. And then it would be great if you can keep working on it by yourselves. All right, if you can keep reading and especially keep developing, keep doing more work in your own applications, but always having in mind that there is an HTTP request or response happening there. You know, it's not just Django magically handling something. Somewhere there should be a request and there should be an HTTP type of response. So it's really important to understand that. So let's get started. HTTP is a stateless text-based protocol. What does that mean? Well, basically, when you guys, let's say text-based, it's the communication between the client and the server will be done just in a text format. So you guys can intercept the request and you can just read it as human readable. That's a good thing. In contrast, there are some other protocols that send data in binary mode. So it's not that easy to read it. In this case, you guys can just intercept a request and you can just read what is happening in there. You can see the content of the request. So all these get/intro to Python, HTTP 1.1, all this is the request itself. It has a format. We're going to see in a second what it's all about. But basically, if you guys intercept it, you can just read about it. If you guys are, for example, debugging your application, you will be able to just read what is going on. You know, I'm getting kicked out from this server. What is going on? Oh, I was sending a post request and I was supposed to send a get request. So you can read it and you can debug it right in place, and it's going to be really handy. It's a stateless protocol. This is a little bit more complicated to explain, but basically there is no concept. There is no concept of state. Every new request made, it's like it was the one and only request sent. It's completely independent to any other requests. So the server will receive any request, and it will treat it as the first one that it ever received. There is no concept of state in, for example, it's not like I send a request, the server responds something, and I can respond back. There is no state. It's just I send a request, I get the response, that's it. If it was the first one or the request 1 million, it's going to happen the same in the same thing. There are, of course, mechanisms for us to keep some sort of state, because I don't know, the simplest functionality that you guys can think about, for example, keep me logged in. You guys log in a site and you say something like keep me logged in. There is some state happening there because the server is remembering that every request made in this case was made by this client that was already authenticated. There are mechanisms, but those mechanisms are outside of HTTP. HTTP, the pure implementation of HTTP, sorry, is stateless, right? So it's important also to understand that. So let me introduce you to HTTP with a simple example. So for example, we're trying to browse our website, right? I can also use HTTP bin is a great site for you guys to also do some practice. It's just to learn and to debug HTTP applications. There are different endpoints that you guys can check. So for example, let's just get this page, and I'm going to, so this site is browsing our website. I don't want to use that one. I should just use this one for you guys to see. And I have here my Chrome developer tools open, and I'm on the network tab. So I want to inspect what is going on with the networks here. So the first thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to reload this page, and we're going to see the requests that have been made. So the communication is started by the client. That's what I do when I first start this request, right? The first request here. Let me get a different, maybe this one. Yeah. So this one right was started by me, right? I am the one starting the communication. I am the one submitting the first request. So the browser is submitting the first request, and the server is answering to that. The format of the request will usually be, not usually, has this form. It has a special keyword here. It will be get, post, put. We're going to see that. It will have a certain path that it's trying to access. And finally, it will display the protocol version, in this case, HTTP 1.1. So if you guys check the request that I have made right here, I bet this is pretty small. I can increase the font size of this particular view right here, but let's see. If I check the request that was made right here, I encourage you guys to just do this with your own browser, right? You can use Chrome or Firefox or Safari. Any of those browsers has a networking tab. And in this case, you guys will see this super tiny. I'm going to copy paste it right here. This is what what Chrome is sending to this particular website. So I'm accessing HTTP bin org/IP, right? And that's the request that it's being made by the Chrome browser. So a get, this is a special keyword. We're going to talk about it in a second. We also have a certain path. We're going to talk about it, and we also have a protocol. So let me start first with the protocol, just to take it like to stop dealing with that from now on. HTTP. HTTP was conceived a long time ago, back in the 90s, I think, or I think it was 89. Well, And it was a dissertation, a doctoral dissertation by a guy named Roy Fidling or Roy Fitting. It's actually the guy that also conceived REST as the style of architecture. And of course, it's an old thing. We realize the mistakes that we make in our libraries and we change them. So there are different versions of HTTP. The first one was 0.9, the second one was 1.0, and the most commonly used right now is HTTP 1.1. It's the one used by 99% of the servers and clients out there. So everything from Google to Facebook to Twitter to our own website, we all use HTTP 1.1, and it's the one that you guys have to take to understand and to learn. Not 0.9, not 1.0, because that's no longer used. 1.1 is the version that we use. Disclaimer here, there is an ongoing implementation of a new version of HTTP. It's 2.0 that started with a protocol named Speedy by Google. So that's still in the process of development. So you guys can start checking it, how it works, what are the changes. But if you want to learn how to do things today, it's important to understand and to start with 1.1. So every time we see from now on HTTP 1.1, you guys know what it is. It's the protocol version, and we'll always use 1.1. So the other thing that we have is the path. It's like we're trying to access this server, and we're trying to tell this particular server what is the path. In this case, it's a static path, right? It's just IP, right, /IP. But path contain more information. So for example, if I access, let's say twitter.com/rmotr.com, which is our Twitter account, in this case, I'm giving a lot of information to the server just with this path. It's basically the user that I'm trying to browse. So that path contains a lot of useful information for the server. And finally, really important is the HTTP method that we will be using for this particular request. So when you guys are, and this is simple to understand, but it's important, so I'm going to stop for a second here. When you guys are when the client is sending an HTTP request, it implies that it needs to perform some type of action from the server. There are different pre-established types of actions to perform in a server, and those are the different HTTP methods we have. Get is the most common one, and it's implying that the client is trying to get, of course, something from the server. It's trying to read something from the server. It's getting, right? I want to get this thing. I want to read it. The other types of HTTP verbs or actions methods that we have are, for example, post, put, patch, delete, and these have, of course, different meanings. Post will try to create something. For example, if we are using the Twitter form to submit a new tweet, we will see, actually, we can just do that right here. We will see a post request that will be done. So if let's see, I'm going to preserve my logs here, testing Flask class live, and I'm going to post this request here. You guys will see, I need to, of course, hide my cookie. You guys will see that I have just sent a post request. So whenever you guys are trying to create something, I try to create a tweet here. The method that I used was post, right? Post is create something new. In several, there are several more HTTP methods. Put, for example, will try to put and patch both will imply that the client is trying to update something, update a resource. For example, if I want to update my tweet, change the text, I don't think I can do that, but there are different types of put and patch. They have a small difference. It's not important right now. We can, for example, issue a delete request, which of course is trying to delete a given resource. head options, there are a few more, but the most common ones are get, post, put patch, and delete. And we have get, read, update, we have put and patch, delete, and post/create, the basics of any system: create, read, update, delete system. That's HTTP. So to check once again, a simple HTTP request is of the HTTP method, the path, and the protocol. Here we have a few examples for you guys to see. We are, for example, trying to read a particular tweet, we're trying to create a new tweet, or we're trying to delete a new tweet. Here, the final intention that the client has will be perceived by the client with like summing all the information. For example, if you want to get a tweet, the path will tell you which tweet you want to get, and the HTTP method will tell you what you want to do. You want to read this tweet. If we have the same path, but we have a different HTTP method that has a completely different meaning for the server. You want to do something on this tweet, but in this case, you want to delete it. So that's why it's so important to manage perfectly both HTTP methods and paths. So, sorry. So we have a question here. REST API should implement all the HTTP methods. No, if you don't need them, to be honest. You will just implement the methods that you actually need. So we saw in detail here the request. Whenever we are sending the request, let me show you once again what we did with HTTP bin, right? We sent an HTTP request. These are the request headers that we sent. Now let's focus on the response, how the server is answering and it's returning this response, which basically consists of a simple JSON document. So the response will generally have this form. We'll have, again, as usual, the protocol, right? We said we're not going to focus on that anymore. It will contain the body of the request. So for example, when you guys browse google.com, it will just build HTML to see google.com. Whenever you guys fetch, I don't know, twitter.com, it will fetch all the tweets from your timeline and it will put it in a gigantic HTML file, and you will read that. And finally, and super important, it will contain a status code. The body is optional. The body we saw here is optional. Usually we're going to see it when we're developing traditional web applications, because we are using our web server to return some HTML to a user, right? When we build APIs, it's not the body will not be required. So as happened with the HTTP method, we will also see that there are different categories of status codes, right? Remember, I'm going back again to the request HTTP methods. We had get, put, post, patch. In this case, and the request, given that HTTP method, the request had a different intention: get, reading, post, creating. In the response, it's going to happen something similar. Depending on the final category of our status code, we can clearly see really quickly what happened with our request. So for example, we're going to see something like a 200 status code. It's going to tell us that it was a successful request. If I tell you response, if I tell you from a request, get something, you quickly see that the client is trying to read something. If in the response you see a status code starting in 200, 200, 300, 201, 210, something, you see it's a successful response. You can then dig deeper and say, well, this particular 201 status code, what does it mean, right? It's something you can dig deeper if you want, but clearly just by seeing the 200, you know that it was successful. We're going to see, again, we're going to dig deeper and see what that particular response involved, but in this case, just seeing a 200 will give you a successful response. In the same meaning, a 300 something response will give you that it's actually a redirection. A 400 something will tell you that it's a client error. It's something that the client did wrong. For example, the most well-known status code, response code out there. Which one? 404, right? Not found. That's an error from the client. The client trying to access a URL, a resource that doesn't exist in this particular server, right? So that's an error from the client. Look, this thing that you're looking for is not present here. That's a 404, right? Not found. We can do just a 400. You know, a 400 usually indicates it's a really generic status code, and it's usually, but it's actually bad request. That's the name. Sorry, it's something I forget to say. The status code is composed of two things: the integer code 200, 201, 400, 404, and a human readable message, right? 200 okay, 201 created, 404 not found. I don't know, 400 bad request, 401 forbidden or unauthorized, I think, 403 forbidden. So it has a human readable message, but the important code here is the important part here is the code, the integer code, because that's what the computers can read better, right? And so again, depending on the status code we receive, we can clearly see as clients, right? We are the clients. We issued a request to this particular server. We got a 400 back. That's a client error. We did something wrong. Usually 400 will imply that we are forgetting to send any particular type of data, or actually the data that we're sending is bad formatted. So we are sending, for example, for something, and we send an email. The email field, we send data that it's not enough formatted, right? An invalid email address. That's going to be a 400 back. 500 is usually an error that happened on the server side, right? So that, as in that case, as clients, we don't have much to do. That's an issue with the server. It's something that is happening temporarily, something that might be fixed in a few minutes, or the server is overloaded, or there's a bad thing going on in the network. So that's usually something that we as clients don't have control over, all right? So it's important to differentiate them both. So any questions before we start talking about an example here? I want to walk you guys through an example of a true life cycle of a request. So what we're going to do now is understand what is going on behind the scenes when we try to browse, in this case, a URL that it's from a URL shortening site, Bitly in this case. And as you guys know, this is it's not the most complex type of request, but it's not just a get google.com and you get something back. In this case, it's going to involve a few steps in between. So the request is going to start, of course, by the client. Let's just see what happens. I get this URL, I paste it in my browser, and I am get redirected back to our website, right? So we're going to see what is going on there. The request, of course, is started by my browser, by the client, and it's sending, as usual, a GET request to bit.li with this particular path, right there. And of course, the protocol version. We're going to see what a host is in a few seconds, but basically, the host is, of course, the domain we're trying to browse. If we're trying to browse bit.li/something, where the host is just the domain that we're trying to browse. The bit.li server doesn't contain the web. It's just a redirecting website. It's a URL shortening service. So it's keeping URL for its customers there. So when I, as a client, try to fetch it, it will redirect me back to the actual website that I want. So in that case, when I browse that particular website, what I'm going to get is a 301 status code response. A 301, again, was a redirect status code. So it's the bit.ly server is basically telling me that resource that you're trying to get, it's not located right here, but it's actually located, and it will send a location header, which we're going to see in a second. The location header will have the actual location of the resource that I'm trying to fetch. So the client, with that information, it made a successful request to bit.ly, but it returned that it was a rejection. So with that, it's going to issue a second request. And now that request is going to be directed to the actual location that it was trying to browse. In this case, rmotr.com. Right? So those are the servers that are implied. You guys can see a few more examples here. For example, an unsuccessful tweet post, right? Trying to access a resource that doesn't exist, etc., etc., etc. As I said when we started, it's really important to understand HTTP. So guys, try to read a little bit about it. So HTTP headers. Let's talk really quickly about HTTP headers. We know, I told you, given the request and the response, for example, the request with the right here, combining both the path that we're trying to access and the HTTP method, the server has a lot of information about like how to respond to that particular request. You're trying to read this particular tweet. You're trying to delete this particular tweet. Now, that is good enough status pending. What is status pending? Where did you see that? Status pending. Status pending. Seems like it's something you're seeing in your developer console. Maybe it's because the Chrome browser is not issuing the request yet, but it's going to issue it after something happens. I'm not exactly sure, to be honest. It's not of the HTTP protocol, at least. So moving forward. So yeah, it's something especially related to JavaScript and how browsers interact with it. So what I was saying was a request, again, given the HTTP method and the path, you're going to have the base information that you need. You're trying to delete this tweet, you're trying to get/read this tweet. But that's usually not enough information. A request wants to send more information, right? To complement that request. I am trying to delete this tweet, and I am this user. I am this authenticated user, and I have the privileges to delete this tweet. I want to delete this tweet, but I'm using an old browser, and this browser doesn't support XML, it just supports HTML. So again, it doesn't matter what type of information we want to send. What we want to see here is we want to complement the base of the basic structure of the request with more information for the server to, of course, have more information to process our final response. So we're going to include headers in our requests, so we can, again, augment, if you want, that information sent with each request. So for example, one of them might be the host. It's like, I am trying to access this particular host, this particular domain, the user agent, right? Just informative for the server to have. I am trying to fetch this particular website, and this is the browser that I'm using. Accept, in this case, it's telling the server what type of format it's accepting, right? So the server can return a response that the client can actually read. Accept encoding gzip, that basically means that the client supports compressing the requests and the responses, sorry. So it's like the client is saying, hey, I want to get these, and by the way, I support compression, so you can just compress everything and I will be able to handle that, so we can save a few bytes in the round trip. So it's all information that is complementing the original request. We could build something entirely without headers, but in practice that would be really, really hard. So that's why we use headers. Headers, of course, can also be included in responses. In this case, they look exactly the same. In this case, what we're doing, where the server is responding back and it's informing what is the server that took care of the request. It's informing the content type of the request, right? Sorry, response. I am returning this, and this is HTML, so you can parse it as a regular HTML. It has this length in bytes, right? So it's giving more information to the client. Again, we might get around without the headers, but it's usually a good complement to include them, right? And in practice, every request and response will include headers. Headers have the same form both in requests and responses. It's just below the main line, right? The main line is, in this case, a request. We just have each header in a new line. We have the header name, a colon sign, a space, and the value of that particular header. So it also happens the same thing in the response. We have each header in a new line, the same format. And in the response, a blank line is left, in this case, this one that we have right here, and then the whole body of the response starts. Questions, anyone? How are you guys feeling up to this point? Good. So now let's get started with the actually important part. We're going to get started with the basics of Python and Flask. All right, so we have given you a good introduction of web development, HTTP, and now we're going to see that working in Python. So what we're going to do is we will be using this getting started project that we have built, and it's open source, so you guys can check it out. One sec, let me share this repo with you guys right here, so you can bookmark it for later. And we will be working with this simple Flask project in Cloud9. Why Cloud9? Because this is also something we do for our own students. We introduce you guys to the process of working with Python in a well-known and standardized platform. The truth is that writing Python code is simple. Working with platforms is really hard. It's like, I know how to code. I know how to write something with Python, but I'm having issues with Windows 7. Someone is having issues with Windows 10. Someone is having issues with Python 2.7 in a Mac. So the code, it's simple to write, but we have issues with the platform. And to be honest, it's really annoying to have issues with platform. And it's something we have identified, to be honest, to be a really demoralizing thing. You know, it's like we have demoralized students, not because they didn't know how to code, but because they were having issues with their platform. So we have now come to a standardized platform. In this case, Cloud9, it's really cool. It's free. I mean, you can have a paid plan, but the basic plan that lets you build simple development environments is completely free. So you can guys use it for free. And we're going to get started. This is basic also. We have a basic guide in case you guys want to check it out after the webinar, getting started with Flask. Let me get the chat window again. There you go. So you can follow it step by step later. And what I'm going to do here is create my live getting started with Flask. I'm not going to choose any description. I will not set a team. And here I have two really, really important steps. The first one is putting here where it says clone from Git or Mercurial URL is the clone URL that I have from here, right? So I'm going to get this URL, https github.com, remote curriculum, blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to put it right here. So this is really important because it's going to pre-populate the workspace with this project contained right here. The second important thing is choosing the correct template. In this case, we're going to choose Python because it has a lot of already pre-installed libraries we can use. Now I'm going to create a workspace. It will take some time, we know it, but we want to do it live so you guys can see the process. And if you have any question, you can always let us know. It's taking a long time. There you go. It's creating it. Cloud9 has the advantage of giving you a virtual machine running a simple Ubuntu Linux installation. So also as a second advantage, for a lot of you, this might be the first time that you guys are dealing with a Linux installation, like working for the first time, for example, with a command line shell as this one that we have right here. So this is basically the Cloud9 workspace we have just built with pre-populated with our project. Why it is so big? There you go. We have, for example, app, runapp.py, runapp, the same files we have right here. So for example, app.py in GitHub, we have the same content here in Cloud9. So the first thing that I'm going to do is trying to run this application. Before we jump into any code, I want it to be running for you guys to see. To run it, I have to do a few things. The first thing I have to do, you should, Tamuka, I'm trying to answer your question here. Did you create the workspace and selected Ruby? If you created your workspace and selected Ruby, don't worry, create a new one. Again, the simple ones are free. Create a new one using Python and start over. As simple as that. I don't know, to be honest, I don't know if the Ruby template has this particular or these particular tools, but I would just try to create a new workspace using Python as a template. If you created your account and you mentioned you were using Ruby, maybe the registration process changed. It's not an issue at all. You will have to select Python when you create the workspace, as we just did. So now, I'm trying to run this application. To run this application, I have to install the Flask library, okay? We have to install libraries in order for this thing to work. We have to install the Flask library. To do that, I will not just install my library globally, right, for the whole system to be available, but I will install it in a virtual environment. And this is a quick introduction to virtual environments. Basically, what we can have is an environment where we can, in this same Linux box, in your own computer, you can have different virtual environments that will have different things installed, so they will not collide between themselves. So for example, you can have virtual environments with just Flask installed, and you can have another virtual environment with Django installed, you know, and they will not collide. So for example, you can have I don't know, Django 1.11, the last version in one virtual environment, to work in a brand new project, or maybe you were working in a legacy project from a client that was using Django 1.8, and you can have both installed in different environments, and you don't have conflicts between them. So what I'm going to do is execute the mk virtual m command that will create a virtual environment. Yes, this video is being recorded and we are doing live streaming on YouTube and Facebook, so you guys can like watch the rest of the recording later. So I am doing, oh, sorry, my bad. There you go. I'm doing the command mk virtual m, that of course stands for make virtual env, and I will here choose a name. And whatever name that I want. For example, starting, let's do Flask Live. Any name that has a special meaning for me. Again, the new project that I'm building, the name of the new project that I'm building, the legacy software that I was building, the name of that, whatever makes sense for me. I'm going to just hit the return key, and the virtual name is going to be created. Here, really important. When you guys are working with virtual environments, again, you can have different virtual environments created. You can have, again, one working with Django 1.8 and other with Django 1.11. The notion is that you will have to have one of those environments active at a given moment to work with that. You know, it's like you have to activate the virtual environment, and anything that you run will be running inside that virtual environment. So we will have to activate and deactivate virtual environments. When I activate a virtual environment, for example, in this case, the Flask Live virtual environment that I had just created, I will see the name of the active virtual environment between parentheses before my prompt. So this is the prompt that we always get, and before that we get between parentheses the name of the virtual environment currently active. So if you guys read these, that means that this virtual environment is currently active, and that's important when you guys are trying to run your application. For example, if you log out from this computer, you restart it, you shut it down, you start it again, the virtual environment will not be active by default, and you will have to activate it manually. So let's check. For example, I'm going to deactivate this virtual environment, and now I don't have any virtual environment active, and I'm going to activate it. So I'm going to do work on, altogether, work on Flask Live, and now this virtual environment is active again. Quick introduction in 5 minutes to virtual environments. I hope it makes sense. Now I'm going to do what I was actually trying to achieve in the first place, was installing Flask. To do that, I'm just going to do pip install Flask. As simple as that. Pip is a tool that we use in Python to fetch libraries, right? It's going to get those libraries from PyPI, pypi.python.com. It was previously known to all people, I mean, to the cheese shop, right? It was where the cheese relied. I think it was a reference to a monthly Python sketch. I don't remember quite well, but every public software project, Django, Flask, requests, everything will live in this software index. So when we do pip install Flask, we're basically fetching the package from that given package repository. So now seems like everything ran, right? Cleaning up, successfully install Flask, and it install a few more things for us. We're going to talk about them later. To check if this thing worked, what I'm going to do is going to fire up Python, my Python interpreter, and I'm going to do import Flask. In this case, as I didn't get any errors, this means that I basically install Flask correctly. For example, if I try to do import Django, it's failing, of course, because Django is not installed. That is obvious. So if you guys are getting something like import error, no module name Flask, that means that it wasn't correctly installed. Now, moving forward, we have our Flask live application running. I am going to do Python run app to start this app, hitting return, and we see some action right here. I'm going to run this thing, 1 sec. I need this URL. I never remember the URL assigned by, where is it, blog. I took care of analyzing this. So as you guys see, it's the workspace name. Copy. There you go. It's the workspace name. It's somewhere around here. There you go. It's the workspace name dash your username dot c9users.io. So basically, that's what I have right here. The workspace name right here. I bet this is pretty small for some of you. And here's my username and basically c9users.io. And here I see I have just increased the size of the font, getting started with Flask. So my website is working. We're going to see the internals of this in a second. The most important thing is that when I do run app.py, as you guys can see, I can do anything here because Flask, it's like it has taken over my console. It has run a long running process. The process that it's running hasn't yet ended, so it has taken over the console. And basically what Flask is doing right here, right, it's running a simple web server for us. So we can just develop as we're doing right here, and we can see what we're working with. And this is a really nice feature from Flask. Tools preview, live preview. What is that? Tools preview. Powell, tools preview, live preview. Oh, I know. So somewhere here. Tools preview, live preview file. It's not active. Oh, I can change it. Nice. I didn't know that. Thank you. So again, Flask is running a simple web server for us. In production, we are not going to use this Flask server. We're going to use maybe a more advanced server like Apache or Nginx or other. So let's see what is going on here. What we run, let me stop the server. I just stopped the server. I will try to fetch my URL again. And of course, I am getting an error because I had just stopped the server. No application seems to be running. Here it's an error from L9. I killed the server. If I start it again, the way I started is with Python runapp.py. So we're going to get started with that particular. Here you see it's running again with that particular Python file. This file is super simple, and here we're getting started seriously with Flask. We're starting to see what is going on. We are doing first, we're importing OS. We're importing our Flask application that we're going to talk about it later. And then we're running, if this is the main module, which is this particular case, what we're doing is we're doing app.debug true. We're setting the debug mode of this application to true. We are configuring or getting a given host and a given port. And finally, we're doing app.run with this particular host and port. And this is a really important thing. When you guys see that this particular web browser is running, it's because app.run was invoked. We are running this web application, that's why we have this web browser right here, and we are listening to requests in this particular host and in this particular host. Now, this app is the real deal. That's our entire application. So we have wrapped our entire Flask application in just one thing called app. And we're going to see that in a second. We're getting app from And this seems a little bit confusing. App, import app. And I could actually change the names, but let's just move forward. I have from app import app means that we're running from the app file. From app, it's basically getting app.py. It's getting the app object, right? So it's importing the app object from the app.py file. This object was created right here. So again, we are containing, Flask has the notion of containing an entire application from this simple application that has a simple stupid text file to a clone of Facebook. Everything is going to be containing just one object. And the way it works is we create first an object, this Flask object, we're using the Flask class that we have imported, right, from the Flask module that we installed a few minutes ago. And we're passing the name, that doesn't matter, you will usually do this. And then we're doing a few things with this same app. So this app right here, the application that we are starting or we are instantiating will go through a set of changings. We're going to add a route, right? We are going to configure a few things, and then the run app script can import it and run it, right? So that's the basics of that. So let's dig deeper into this app thing and see what it actually is. Whenever the way we have with Flask to answer to requests to a given path will be by creating the concept of a view. That's what we call it. So whenever you guys browse, for example, this particular URL, which is of course the root one, just slash, I will be getting a response from a given view. When we can create a view, the basic, what we actually need is just a function, a simple Python function, no magic here. And we need to decorate that function with a given app decorator. So we're going to get the app that we previously created, this same app. And we're going to say that this view, this function, will respond to any requests made to this particular route that we have right here. Right, so we do slash, again, I'm going to include the slash here, slash route, and we are responding to that with this particular text. So let's make a change here to this text, or responding live. And I want to show you something interesting here. Please keep your eyes also in the console. I'm adding a few blank lines. I'm going to save this file. I haven't saved it yet. So I'm going to save it. And you guys will see that it says detected change in the actual file that changed, reloading. So the Flask web server is listening for changes to changes in different files that are related to the application. And whenever it detects one of these changes, it will reload the entire application with these changes, which is of course really handy. We have to stop and start the server again. The Flask will just reload it. So if I hit Command R here, if I refresh this page, I see the new text that I have right here. So again, important, we will have different views in our application. We're going to have, for example, we are the Twitter, we're developing Twitter, so we have to build the homepage. We also have the the URL for a given user. We have something like /profile. We have something like /login. Right? We have different paths that we want to respond to. We will create a new view for each one of those paths. Right? So, for example, this is the home path. The view again will be just a regular Python function, and it will contain, or sorry, it will be decorated with a given route, and it will basically hook or connect. This function will respond to this route. Whenever someone tries to access this route in this particular web application, we're going to execute this. So that's the first thing. You guys create a view by writing a simple Python function and connecting it with the route. The second important thing, and I think you guys haven't noticed yet this, is how simple it is, the view that we have just reading. It's just a simple one-liner that it's returning a string, a regular Python string. And Flask, and this is why we use a framework on the first place, Flask is taking care of a lot of things for us. Let me show you the requests that are made to this particular path. So I'm going to reload this again, and we're going to see the requests and the response that were sent, the HTTP requests and responses. And we're going to see how Flask took care of all that complexity for us. The only thing that we have written here is return and the string that we want to return. And Flask has taken care of doing all the HTTP work for us. And if we check that again to see, again, I bet this is pretty small for all of you. I don't know how to increase this particular font size. Maybe I can. No, I can't. No, I cannot zoom in. Maybe the Zoom has a tool. No. Let's check again the request. So the request is done by the browser. We don't have much action there. The browser sends a GET request to the slash route / right here, and the protocol version. And now let's take a look at the response that Flask returned. And now I'm going to enlarge this text for you guys to see it. We see it in the response header, so you guys can do it by yourselves. And this is basically what we received. HTTP 1.1 200 OK, the basic HTTP response. Flask took care of guessing if you want the content type request. By default is returning text/HTTP. And the charset that we're using, it took care of computing the length of this particular response. So if I open a new terminal here and I quickly run Python, let's do Python right there, and I do the len of this particular string, what I get is 18 bytes because this ASCII, it's 1 byte per character. So Flask is taking care of a lot of things. It's wrapping. We are responding with just one simple string, and Flask is wrapping it in an entire valid and HTTP valid response. Right? It's getting the content, it's calculating the length, it's assuming a content type for us, and it's returning back to the client a valid HTTP response. And that's really, really important. Flask, again, it's abstracting a lot of complexity to us. Again, the same recommendation, you should try by all your means to understand what is going on, trying to browse the requests, but just to work simply, Flask has just abstracted you from all these complexities. So moving forward, we have just received an HTTP response. I'm going to browse the source page right here, and I see that I have just the string that I returned. But I also see that Flask is informing our client that it's using a text HTML. So here, what I'm going to do is I can, for example, return some HTML code. I can do something like h1/h1, /h1. I can set this again, detected change, reloading. I can run it again. And now I see h1 HTML tag, right? Of course, I see the HTML parsed in my browser, but if I see the source code, I see what I was returning from this particular view. So I can just return HTML there. Of course, we will not just write the HTML in our views because they are going to grow really ugly. Like let's check the source code of this particular Medium page, which is a super simple page. See, this is the HTML of that. Do you guys imagine putting all these inside this function, wrapped or contained all in a string? That would be really ugly. So what we can do is we can build HTML files, right, by themselves, like individual files that will contain the base of our application. I'm going to browse now the template view for you guys to see it. So I'm going now to /template. And this is basically what I'm saying. I'm going to. The view right here was super simple. The only thing that we did was use this render template function that is from the Flask web framework. So here you guys do Flask. From Flask, import Flask request render template. This is a function that we're using. And we are passing the name of the template that we want to render. And it's basically, this will be the content of that template. This thing, we're going to save it in the index.html template. This template by default has to reside in the templates directory. So here, Flask is also taking care of a few things for us, because at the end of the day, this is just a simple file, a simple, regular operating system-based file. Flask is taking care of reading the content of the file and returning that back to the user. So the same thing that you guys see here, right here, is what you guys have right here. It's exactly the same content, almost, because we're going to see one difference. So what we do right here is we want to return some HTML code. We do not want to include it all in the same string. So what we do is we put it in a separate file, and then we just return this render template function that basically includes the template location or name that we have. In this case, index.html. As I told you, index should live in the template, or must live in the templates directory for it to work. We can change that, but it's usually recommended just to leave it as it is. You know, the defaults are something good. Now, our templates will usually have some parts that are, how to put it, common for every view. Like, for example, the header in this case is going to be usually common. If I browse back to our, well, not this case, but for example, we have two different blog posts from our blog in Medium. We have a few things that are common, right? For example, the header is the same in both, the name here, but there will be a few pieces of information that are going to change. So for example, when was this thing published? This was published on April 8th, and this was published on March the 20th. So this information will be different. The template will remain the same. Here, put a, let's see what it has right here. I'm going to inspect the, oh, sorry. I'm going to check the HTML code, and we're going to see that it's just a simple time element. But what it has inside, either March 20th or April 8th, will be a different content. So what we're going to do in our template, and we're doing it in this example for you guys to see, is we will put placeholders for our application. For example, if I want to change this title, I could say something like, this is, or let's say just here, title. I'm going to put here a placeholder, and I'm going to say, this is the entire page that I work. I know that it's a body and it has a h1 element with the title, right? So in this case, it's going to be the class, and in this case, it's going to be a different title. I will put the placeholder in the template, and then I will use my view to define what information to use for that particular placeholder, for in this case the title. So for example, I can change here, am I using the name? No. I can use here, for example, title, I don't know, learning Flask. So the view will provide the title, and it's like the template is a not complete representation that has holes in it, the placeholders, and then we will combine it with a view that will fill those holes, that will provide information for those placeholders, sorry, and the final result is the one that is going to be sent back to the user. So in this case, we are filling the hole with title, right? Or sorry, in the title placeholder with these particular strings. So if I reload this again, I will see learning Flask. So I could have, for example, different views. Let's build another view really quickly. Template view 2. I'm going to template 2. And I'm going to use the same index file, but now I'm doing, is this any good? I'm just putting any text, and now I'm going to access template 2. And I see a different title. So again, it's the same template, but I'm changing the information that I'm going to use in the template. Usually, we will not have two different views. For example, here, what we can do is something like get blog from post from database. So we're fetching what Medium is doing right here. It's fetching the blog post from a database, and it's getting the title of the blog post, the content, the date that it was published, how many minutes it's going to take to read it. And with that information that it got from the database, is finally putting it together to render the final view. So sorry, I had a few chat messages. Yes, our site, which is rmotr without the .com, is also built with Django. Yep, and learn also. Learn rmotr.com. Blog.rmotr.com. Our blog is entirely hosted on Medium, so we haven't written a single line of code there. All right, so moving forward. We saw how to use a simple template. What I want to show you, the next step, is how to basically use or respond to different types of URLs. Because, for example, when you guys access to, I don't know, twitter.com, you can basically put any user here, right? And this is a dynamic generated URL. We don't usually know what to put here, right? In this case, if we are building Twitter, this thing is going to be the username that we're trying to browse. So to do that, we're going to use, we have a few mechanisms with Flask to do that. And are these pieces of code that we have right here. This piece of code basically inform that here we need a dynamic generated URL. So I'm going to, for example, do parameterized. I'm going to access the parameter-based route. I'm going to put my name here. And my age, which is 29. So here, this view is computing that this is my name, and in 2020, I will be 32 years old. It's getting all that information from the URL, and this is dynamic. I can put here Daniel, who is 22. And of course, that information now is different, or I can put Mary, who is, I don't know, 25. And I have different results based on the parameters and the URL that I'm basically sending. So how does that work? The first thing is defining the URL, and I'm setting some part of this URL. The first part is, in this case, fixed or static parameterized, right? It's just static. It will always be the same string. And then I just need to put these angle brackets to include the name of the parameter that I want to receive. In this case, I'm putting both the data type and also the name. But in this case, I will just remove it so you guys see that it works in the same way. It works in the same way. Basically, I'm including the name of the parameter, not name like Mary is a name, but the name of the parameter. For example, username, age, right? Age is the name of the second parameter. I have a dynamic generated view with a static part and two dynamic parameters, named name and age. I will then receive or expect these these parameters to be passed to my to my view, right? Because I wanna, in this case, respond. I want to get access to these parameters. The way Flask gives you access to these parameters is by passing them to the view that you have created. So of course, know that the previous view that we had didn't include any parameter. This one, of course, includes parameter. We're also seeing how to pass a default value. So the full version of this URL is how old will be Mary, who today is 25, in 2030, for example. She will be 38 years old. We can omit this third parameter, and we have by default the year as target being to 2020. And that's basically we have a default parameter. So this URL is responding both to just two parameters or to three parameters. All right, so that's the beauty of this Flask view. Then we have just simple code right here. We're computing the age that Mary will be, or sorry, the user will be at that given target year. And we are basically returning a template that we have right here with the information for that particular user. So gave the name of the user is what we're passing here. So we have, if we check age.html, we see welcome name, and this name is the one present here. And we have, for example, the target year, etc. We have some information in this template. What you guys will see also here is that Flask is the template that we are including has some special syntax. And this is because Flask includes by default a simple, not a simple, but by default, it includes a template engine that will not let us just include these placeholders, what we have seen before, but it will also let us perform some control flow based operations. For example, an if statement, repeat through things, different type of operations. This template engine is not actually Flask, but it's actually Shinsha. It's a template engine already included with Flask. It's already installed when you guys install Flask. But it's important for you guys to understand when you're using templates, the library that you are actually using, it's not Flask, but it's Shinsha, the Shinsha template engine. And you guys we encourage you to take a look at it. Again, for example, here you have a simple repetition. So we can, for example, do something to integrate with Flask. Yeah, it's Shinsha. For example, I can pass a simple list of things. Let me just hard code it. Let's say I know, users or messages. We are passing different messages to this view, and we are passing just a list of messages with hello world. How are you doing? I don't know, messages, simple. Goodbye. And here in the template, I can do something like, for example, UL, and I want to create different LI. Different LI tags, message 1, message 2, message 3, right? So that's basically what I want to display right here. But these messages that I'm generating, they are dynamic, so I don't know how many I'm going to get. right? Probably this was fetched from a database. So I can simply use in this case, just to show you guys one of these important, this one right here, one of these important control flow structures, the for loop. So I can just do something like, well, right there, for message in, what was the name that I used? Messages. I need to include an N4. And here I will repeat just one li element for each one of the messages that I have. And I will pass the actual message as the content of this li. So here, if I save this and I reload my page, oh, what happened? Oh, it's just, I never put a comma here. My bad, super bad. There you go. So I have the 3 messages. So let's suppose that I add a new message, message 4. I see 4 messages. And let me show you the source code, we see 4 li elements. If I don't know, I remove 2, I reload it, I see now just 2, right? 2. And that's basically done with this for loop. I'm just iterating through each one of the messages that I have. So that's the most important part related to parameters, passing parameters, and generating dynamic views. So finally, something that we want to show you is 2 things, and we're kind of wrapping up today's class. The 2 important concepts are first, how to get information from the request. So I'm going to just load this /JSON view for you guys to see it. And this particular view, there you go, has 2 things for you guys to check out. The first one is the information that we can get from the request. So in this case, we can get the IP from the client, the information sent by the client, we can get the HTTP method, all these from the request. And to do that, we just use this simple request object that we see right here. So we do from Flask import request, and then in each one of our views, we can just get the request information, of the request that was performed, including method, path, the IP address, headers, etc., etc., etc. The second thing that we're showing you here is that by default, remember when I show you the the response and the headers that Flask automatically included? By default, Flask we can change the content type that will be returned by default. So in this case, if I check the network again, you guys will see, again, I'm sorry, I know this is super tiny, but here the response that we see, I'm going to replace it. This was the previous one, was HTML by default. Now we are returning application JSON, and we are the ones that manually return that given header. So this is another way to return from a view. Remember, our simplest view was just returning 1 string. Well, the truth is that we can return a string plus 2 more things. One of them is the status code, and the other one are extra headers. So by default, you just return 1 string. It's going to be the one passed to the client, but you can also include a status code and extra headers. That's the way it works. And that's what we're doing right here. So we're returning 200, and these extra headers, which is what we're getting right here. So for example, again, this 200, okay, I can change this and return a 201, for example. It doesn't make much sense because 201 is created, but just for you guys to read, to see. So I'm going to see this JSON code, and I'm going to check here, and I get 201 created with, again, the length, everything computed by Flask. So that basically wraps what we have done right here, guys. We have, again, seen the basics of web development. We have seen the basics of HTTP, how to set a simple environment, creating virtual environments using Cloud9, installing Flask, running the sample application, returning from simple views, working with templates. This is a new world, right? For you guys that are starting with it, this is a new world entirely. What we have found out from our own students is that usually it's really hard to get started, and we want to minimize that. It's like you guys say, I want to start with web development, and then install this, check that, this thing with the platform, this thing is not working. So many bumps in the road that gets you just demoralized. What we're trying to do here is help you get started, right? So just to simplify the path for you guys to work. Shamil, package JSON allow method authenticate with tokens. You can use the JSON package. It's actually from the Python. It's just a Python standard library to authenticate messages. Yes, for example, with JSON web tokens, but there are already libraries built for that. So that's a goodie from Python. JSON web token, Python. There are libraries already built for that, actually for Django, for different frameworks, so you guys don't have to worry about it. So again, what we try to do here is just to make it as simple as possible for you guys to get started. We encourage you to start it, all right? Go ahead and start writing code. Write something simple. Move and say, I'm going to now build a contact form. I'm going to try to do authentication, read documentation, try to write as much code as possible. Two more things, two more reminders. We have a free course built in our custom platform, so you guys can check it out, and it has detailed explanations of every step that we have gone through in this particular webinar. Everything from working with forms, working with static files, a better explanation of routes. Everything is contained in that course. Again, it's free, it's open. Please let us know if you guys find so thank you again for joining. I don't know if anyone has any question, we can wrap it up. Remember that all these was live streams, so you guys will have access to it later in our YouTube channel or in the Facebook platform. We try to live stream it because we know that those are platforms you can just access. You know, just get the YouTube app. Everyone has a YouTube app, so it's just a good thing to have. So again, thank you all for joining. Check out our courses at rmotr.com. Rmotr.com. If you want to join, it's a highly practical course. We do a lot of coding together. So if you want to interested, just check us out. Oh, by the way, we'll be sending a few promo codes for courses starting in April, but I will do that again. Baltasar. Not right now for Django. We're trying to wrap up Flask again because we're trying to help people that are getting started, and we believe that Flask is a good choice. But we have planned a few webinars about Django in the future. So yeah, we will do it, but not right now. Check out our course, Web Development with Django. It's an advanced one, but it's a good one also. All right, guys, thank you very much for joining. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out. Santiago@rmotr.com. That's my email address. Just ping me. See you all. Happy coding. Good night. Good day for some of you. And see you around. Thank you.